Okay, in this lesson, we're talking about what is your role in the production process. We're going to talk about receiving and checking the raw materials. We're going to talk about monitoring the whole production process and the option of taking a hands-on or a hands-off approach. So the way it works is that the merchandisers, like once you've made your deposit and it's time to buy all the raw materials, fabric, trims, and accessories, in the case of like apparel, the merchandisers that work in the factory, they have to contact sometime between 15 to 20 different subcontractors, suppliers that specialize in all the different fabrics, trims, and accessories. And then those all get shipped to the factory and stored in the factory warehouse, and they come in sporadically. So obviously the factory will inspect. They don't always do 100% inspection, but they certainly inspect 10 or 15% and look for any potential problems, because if there are problems, they have to send it back and have the subcontractor do it again. But you will also be asked to approve everything that they receive on what are called trim cards. So not all factories do this, and it's a red flag if they don't. But a good factory will have a trim card, and on that trim card will have samples of every single trim or accessory. And at the bottom, there will be places to sign off on it. And you're checking for color matching, you're checking the verbiage on the care labels, you're checking the size of the buttons and the zippers, and it's all taped. All the samples are taped to that board, and then that board is part of your golden sample that goes through the production process, so that if there's any problems with color mismatch or button size problems or label problems, you'll always refer back to that trim card. So one of the things that you can do during the production process as your role is just to be aware of what's been received and be proactive to approve everything, like on the trim card. Once all the raw materials are received and checked and it's time to put everything into the sewing lines, they start the whole production process. And if you decide to be involved, then you'll have the option of just paying attention to every single step, like relaxing fabric, cutting, bundling, the sewing process, the end-of-line QC, ironing, packaging, and the final QC. Here's a few insider tips about the production process if you decide to take a hands-on approach. Number one is, once the factory cuts the fabric, there's no turning back. So if you know that they haven't cut the fabric yet and you're having second thoughts, or you want to make some significant changes, if they haven't cut the fabric yet, it's still okay to call them and say, "I'll stop. I need to make some changes." But if they've already cut the fabric and you ask for changes, they won't be happy, and it's just not practical. Because once the fabric is cut, then there's not much else they can do. They have to finish out the production. If you just, for whatever reason, back out altogether and they've already cut the fabric, then most likely they'll just go ahead and finish producing all those garments, and then they'll try to sell them to the black market to recuperate some of their costs. But if they haven't cut the fabric and you want to make some significant changes, there's still an open window to talk to them and try to make those changes. They'll probably increase the price a bit, but at least you still have the opportunity to make those changes. If you have any like printing or embroidery or sequins, most likely the factory does not do it in-house, so they have to send it out. So what they do is they cut the fabric, and then like say it's a dress shirt, they'll cut the fabric into right sleeve, left sleeve, collar, front right panel, front left panel, and after they cut it, they bundle them all together. So let's say you're going to do an embroidery on the front right pocket or front left pocket. So what they'll do is they'll just take this front panel bundled together and they'll ship it out to the print or the embroidery factory. And then when the print and embroidery factory is done, they'll have it shipped back. Then the factory will inspect the print and embroidery, and then they have to match that front left panel with the rest of the group of panels. And it's a weak point in the production process. There can be delays, there can be quality issues, but it's a logistics nightmare. But the factories, they do it all the time, so they're used to managing it. But just be aware of that, and that's the bundling phase and the print and embroidery phase of production. So back to the question of what is your role in the production process, you basically have two options. You can take a hands-on approach or a hands-off approach. If you take a hands-on approach, then you basically have to be there as much as you can and just monitor the whole process. And you can either do it yourself, you can hire someone, a staff, to do it for you, or you can hire a third-party QC company. But if you hire a third-party QC company, remember we've talked about it before, the cost for one qualified quality control person is approximately $250 per man day. So if you end up having to be in the factory, or a third-party QC person's in the factory for 5 days, that's 5 times $250. So it can get expensive. And usually, as we've mentioned before in some other QC lessons, the minimum is to have a QC staff in the factory on the first day to do an inline inspection, and that's when they would be inspecting all the raw materials. But if there's any problems with all the input materials, it's kind of too late because the factory is ready to start sewing. So that's a bit of a liability. The second time you'd have a third-party QC company in the factory is to do the final third-party QC inspection. But if you choose to take a hands-off approach, you're basically trusting the factory and praying that everything goes smoothly. And I don't recommend it. There are a lot of factories around the world who are super professional and they manage QC in-house. But even those factories, they're human and they make mistakes. But if you don't catch the mistakes until the goods are in your warehouse, it's hugely problematic to get the problems fixed. In some cases, you'll have to ship the goods all the way back to the country where they were made, and the factory will have to unpack everything and remake it. And that's not very practical, and it's very time-consuming and costly. So if you choose a hands-off approach, which I don't recommend, make sure that the factory you're working with has a very good reputation and has excellent in-house QC, and make sure that in your production contract you cover all your bases. What if there are quality control issues? How will you be compensated, and how will the problems be resolved? Okay, so in summary, what is your role in production? I recommend you take a hands-on approach. Either you do it yourself, or you have one of your staff do it, or you hire a third-party QC. Check the raw materials as soon as they get to the factory, then do an inline inspection and follow along through the production steps, and then do a final third-party QC inspection. If you choose hands-off, just be super careful and hope for the best, plan for the worst. So in the next lesson, we're going to talk about how will you control quality. See you there.